The problem? Queen Bee Fossey had decided while watching her beta stare at a wall was that Garrett Thorne was the most competent, reliable, and emotionally constipated wolf she had ever met. And she had met a lot of wolves. He was standing at the side of the Great Hall during morning council, doing his job, which he did flawlessly, always, without fail, to a degree that made Bee want to shake him by the shoulders and scream. The elder from the northern settlement was presenting grain figures. Garrett was listening with the focused intensity of a man whose entire identity was built on being useful. He was taking notes. Of course he was taking notes. He probably organized his notes by color. He probably had a filing system for his feelings, except the drawer marked personal life had been welded shut 2 years ago, and he'd swallowed the key. 2 years. That was how long Margot Allister had been serving as the pack's head healer. 2 years since she'd arrived. Quiet, precise, with steady hands and a gaze that could perform surgery, and Bee had watched Garrett's entire operating system crash and reboot in a slightly wrong configuration. It had been subtle because everything about Garrett was subtle. But Bee knew her people. She knew the pack the way a conductor knows an orchestra. Every note, every rest, every tiny off-key moment that signaled something was coming. And what was coming, for 2 excruciating years, was absolutely nothing. Because Garrett wouldn't make a move, and neither would Margot, and they were both so committed to their mutual avoidance that they'd elevated professional distance to an art form. Margot was standing on the opposite side of the hall, hands clasped behind her back, listening to the grain report with the same clinical attention she gave everything. She was calm. She was composed. She had not looked at Garrett once in the last 40 minutes, which was precisely how Bee knew she was thinking about him constantly. People who genuinely weren't interested didn't work that hard at not looking. "You're staring at them again," said Thistle, the dry, flat voice of Bee's wolf. Thistle had the personality of an accountant who'd been forced to attend a poetry reading. She disapproved of nearly everything Bee did, particularly anything that could be categorized as meddling. "I'm observing," Bee corrected. "You're scheming. I can feel you scheming. It's like a rash." "I'm the queen. I'm strategizing. It's different." "It is not different. It is the same thing with a fancier word." "Leave the beta and the healer alone. They are adults. This is not your problem." "They are my adults," Bee thought firmly. "And they are making each other miserable. And it is my problem, because their unresolved tension is so thick that the kitchen staff has started a betting pool. I will not have my court turned into a gambling den over whether 2 grown wolves can manage basic communication." Thistle was unimpressed. The kitchen staff has always had a betting pool. Last month it was about whether the cook would set the bread on fire again. "You are not solving a crisis. You are bored." Bee chose not to dignify that with a response. She turned her attention back to the hall, where the grain report was winding down. Garrett's pen had stopped moving. His gaze, for one unguarded second, had drifted across the room toward Margot. His expression didn't change. Nothing about him changed, visibly. But Bee saw the pen tighten in his grip. She saw the almost imperceptible straightening of his already perfect posture. She saw the way he blinked once, deliberately, and looked back at his notes. Across the room, at the exact same moment, Margot's clasped hands shifted behind her back. Her thumb pressed hard into her opposite palm. Bee smiled. "Here we go," Thistle muttered. The weekly pack run happened at dawn on 6th day, and it was one of Bee's favorite rituals. Not because she particularly enjoyed running. She was a queen, not a marathon enthusiast. But because it was the only time the pack was truly itself. No titles, no ranks, no carefully maintained professional distance. Just wolves. The clearing behind the compound filled with bodies as pack members stripped down and shifted. This was always the slightly undignified part. Clothing didn't survive the change, and no matter how many designated shifting areas the pack built, there was always someone hopping on one foot trying to yank off a boot while their wolf surged impatiently beneath their skin. Elder Harmon, who had been giving the same grain report for 30 years, had never once managed to fold his trousers before shifting. They lay in a crumpled heap every 6th day morning, and every 6th day afternoon he complained about the wrinkles. B shifted early, letting Thistle take the lead. In wolf form, Thistle was a compact, sandy-furred creature with sharp eyes and an air of permanent disapproval, which, B had to admit, was not entirely different from her human expression. She watched the pack assemble. Desmond, her mate, was a massive tawny wolf who shook himself once and set out at an easy lope, the pack falling into loose formation behind him. Younger wolves bounded ahead, burning off energy, nipping at each other's ears. The elders kept a steady pace at the center. Anya shifted into a lean, reddish wolf and immediately tried to race Finn, the youngest patrol wolf, who had the legs of a yearling and the coordination to match. He tripped over a root within 30 seconds and pretended he'd meant to stop there. And there was Garrett. His wolf was striking, a powerful black-furred creature with intelligent amber eyes and the kind of precise, controlled gait that suggested he had somehow brought his filing system into wolf form. He ran at Desmond's right flank, exactly where a beta should be. Even running on 4 legs through damp morning forest with his tongue out, the man was on duty. Margot's wolf was harder to spot. She was silver-gray, smaller than Garrett's, but built for endurance, with ears that rotated constantly, taking in information, cataloging it, filing it away. Even in wolf form, she was a diagnostician. She ran near the middle of the pack, steady and quiet, occasionally veering to check on an older wolf whose stride seemed stiff. What B noticed, what she always noticed, happened around the 2nd mile. The pack had spread out along the ridge trail, wolves weaving between trees, and somehow, by the kind of coincidence that only happened when 2 wolves were magnetically aware of each other's exact position at all times, Garrett and Margot ended up running in parallel. Not together, 10 feet apart with 3 other wolves between them, but matching pace, stride for stride. Perfectly synchronized without once acknowledging each other. It lasted maybe 40 seconds before Garrett overcorrected, veering hard to the right to check on a younger wolf who didn't need checking on. Margot simultaneously angled left to investigate a patch of ground that held nothing of medical interest. They can't even be near each other in wolf form, B thought, delighted. Wolves run near other wolves, Thistle replied. It's called a pack rhythm. You are reading too much into a run. They synchronized their gait, Thistle. And then they both panicked and ran in opposite directions. Thistle had no response to this. After the run, wolves shifted back in the clearing and reached for clothes left in neat piles along the fence posts. The first few seconds after returning to human form were always slightly disorienting, the world resizing, fingers remembering how to be fingers, and this was when people were most themselves. Margot emerged from her shift with the quick, economical movements of someone who had done this 1,000 times, grabbed her tunic, and pulled it over her head in one smooth motion. She was already walking back toward the infirmary before most wolves had found their second boot. Garrett, meanwhile, was standing by the water trough with his shirt in his hand, not putting it on, staring at nothing. His hair was damp. His expression was the expression of a man whose wolf had just spent an entire run providing commentary he did not ask for. B recognized that look. That was the look of a human who had just been subjected to a full inner wolf monologue about someone's running form. Poor man, Thistle said, and she almost sounded like she meant it. The scheme came to be that afternoon, fully formed, over tea. Desmond, darling, she said, settling onto the arm of his chair in their private quarters. He looked up from the border report he was reading. His expression immediately became wary. He had been married to her long enough to recognize the specific tone of voice that preceded what he diplomatically called her projects. B. The archives are a disaster. The archives have been a disaster for 60 years. Exactly. It's time someone sorted them out. The medical records from the last healer rotation are mixed in with the treaty documents, and those old herb inventories need to be separated from the tax scrolls. It's a specialized job. She paused, timing it. We need someone who understands our political records and someone who can identify the medical texts. Desmond stared at her. No. Garrett knows the political filing system better than anyone, and Margot is the only one who can tell a fever remedy from a property deed when they're both written in Old Tongue. B. For the good of the pack, my love. You're going to lock my beta and my head healer in a small room together and pretend it's about filing. It is about filing. The fact that they'll be in close proximity for several hours in a confined, candlelit space is simply a logistical reality. He's right, Thistle said. This is transparent. It is not transparent, Bee countered. It is airtight. They literally cannot argue with the assignment. Desmond rubbed his temples. He did this a lot. Bee suspected he was developing a callus. Fine, but when this blows up, I am telling them both it was entirely your idea. It won't blow up. It's archives. Everything you touch blows up. That's your gift. She positioned herself in the corridor outside the archive room the next afternoon. Not lurking, Queens did not lurk. She was inspecting the hallway tapestries, with great interest, for an extended period. Through the heavy wooden door, she could hear exactly nothing. This was, paradoxically, informative. The absence of conversation between two people trapped in a small room together was its own kind of noise. After the first hour, she opened the door. Just checking if you need anything. Water? Tea? The scene inside was both impressive and depressing. Garrett had established a system on the left wall, treaties sorted by era, alliances by region, trade agreements by commodity. It was meticulous. Margot had claimed the right wall, medical texts organized by condition, then by date, then cross-referenced with the herb inventories. It was equally meticulous. They were working in perfect, horrifying silence, each moving around the other with the spatial awareness of two people who knew, at all times, exactly how many inches separated them. They didn't brush past each other. They didn't reach for the same scroll. They had, through some unspoken agreement, divided the room into territories as clearly as any pack divided hunting grounds. "Looking wonderful," Bee chirped, her heart sinking. "Thank you, my queen," Garrett said without looking up. "The medical texts are in worse condition than I expected," Margot reported, because she was the kind of person who gave status updates to authority figures without being asked. "Several of the old fever remedies are water damaged. I'll need to transcribe them before they're lost entirely." "How dedicated," Bee said. "Both of you. So dedicated. To the archives." "Go away," Thistle advised. Bee went away. She came back an hour later. This time, something had shifted. Not dramatically, not in any way either of them would ever acknowledge. But Bee had spent 2 years watching these two, and she had developed a finely tuned instrument for detecting change. They were closer together. Not intentionally, they'd converged on the same shelf, where the medical and political records overlapped. Some old pack census that was half population data, half health survey. They were both leaning over it, Margot pointing at a column of figures, Garrett frowning at the corresponding text. "This isn't a death toll," Margot was saying. "It's a quarantine record. Look at the dates. They map to the Greyfang outbreak 2 generations back." "That changes the interpretation of the Ash Creek Treaty," Garrett said. And there was something in his voice, a note of genuine interest, the first spark of anything unguarded Bee had ever heard from him in Margot's presence. They weren't negotiating from strength. They were negotiating while half their pack was dying. "Exactly," Margot said, and there was the ghost of a smile on her face. Not directed at him, directed at the discovery itself. But he saw it, and his hand, which had been reaching for the same page she was holding, stopped in midair. Hovered, then withdrew, carefully, to his side. Margot's ghost smile vanished. She stepped back. "I should finish the transcription work." "Yes," Garrett said. "And I have the trade documents to catalog." They retreated to opposite sides of the room. Bee stood in the doorway, holding 2 cups of tea they hadn't asked for, and felt the quiet devastation of watching 2 people almost reach for each other and pull back. "That was painful," Thistle admitted. "You see?" Bee thought. "You see? They want this. They're just too afraid. Or too smart. A relationship between the beta and the head healer could complicate— I know the argument, Thistle. I've heard it from both of them without either of them saying it out loud. Give them the tea and leave." Bee gave them the tea. She left. She did not leave the project alone. In the days after the archives, Bee noticed Margot had started taking evening walks along the compound wall. Not unusual for a healer who spent all day indoors. What was unusual was that twice, Bee spotted her shifting at the tree line. A quick private change. The silver-gray wolf emerging and trotting along the ridge for 20 minutes, before returning, shifting back, and walking to the infirmary as though nothing had happened. Wolves who were agitated shifted more. It was biological. The body needed the release the way lungs needed air. The fact that Margot, who was usually disciplined about her shifting schedule, was adding unscheduled runs told Bee everything she needed to know about the state of the woman's composure. The first real crack appeared 3 days after the archives. Bee was in the Great Hall reviewing supply requests with Garrett. Normal business. He was his usual efficient self, running through the inventory with the focus of a man who had replaced his personality with a to-do list. Everything was under control. Then Margot walked through the hall. She wasn't walking to them. She was crossing to the infirmary corridor, carrying a basket of fresh herbs from the garden. She didn't stop. She didn't look over. She just walked, the way she always walked, straight-backed, purposeful, her dark hair pulled into its usual severe knot. Garrett stopped talking mid-sentence, not because he noticed her, or rather, not because he meant to notice her. His mouth kept going without consulting his brain. And the Northern Patrol needs resupply by 4-day, and the grain stores are adequate through spring, and she sorts the feverfew by stem length, which is actually more efficient than... He stopped. Bee's eyebrows climbed so high they nearly left her face. Garrett closed his eyes. A muscle in his jaw worked. He opened his eyes, stared at the supply ledger as if it had personally offended him, and said very quietly, "I meant to say the herb stores are adequate." "Of course you did," Bee said. Her voice so carefully neutral it deserved an award. "The herb stores." "Yes." "Sorted by stem length." "I didn't say that. You absolutely said that." "It was a slip. I've been reviewing the infirmary inventory with Margot's quarterly report. The classifications were still in my head." "Naturally." That's all it was. "I believe you completely." Garrett looked at her. His eyes, normally the steady amber of a wolf in complete control, had a faintly hunted quality. "Bee," he said, and his voice carried the weight of a man about to say something important. "My wolf has opinions." This was the most personal thing Garrett had voluntarily said to her in 2 years. Bee kept her face absolutely still. Inside, she was vibrating at a frequency only dogs could hear. "Opinions," she repeated, mildly, "about organizational systems. He finds certain approaches to inventory management." Garrett seemed to be choosing his words with the care of a man defusing a bomb. "Aesthetically pleasing." "Your wolf finds Margot's herb sorting system aesthetically pleasing?" "I didn't say Margot." "You didn't have to." Garrett made a sound that might have been a groan swallowed by dignity. "He composed a ranking system for her filing categories, on a scale of 1 to 10. Her cross-referencing methodology scored a 9.4. Bee bit the inside of her cheek so hard she tasted blood. Only a 9.4? He deducted points for insufficient use of color coding. Bee excused herself from the meeting 3 minutes later, walked calmly to her private quarters, closed the door, and laughed until she cried. "A 9.4, Thistle said, and even she sounded mildly amused. "For herb sorting." "His wolf is rating her filing system, Thistle. He is in love. He is a beta with an opinionated wolf. That is not the same thing. It is exactly the same thing." The annual health check was Bee's masterpiece. It required no scheming at all, technically. The health check was real. It was mandatory. Every PAC member submitted to it. The only tiny, insignificant adjustment Bee made was suggesting, over breakfast, as if the thought had just occurred to her, that the beta's checkup should be handled by the head healer personally. "He's the second most important wolf in this pack," Bee said to Margot, who had come to deliver her quarterly health report. His well-being is a matter of pack security. Surely the head healer should oversee it directly. Margot's face did something complicated. It started as professional acceptance, briefly detoured through what Bea could only describe as controlled panic, and settled into rigid calm. Of course, my queen. I'll schedule it. Today would be ideal. His calendar is clear this afternoon. I checked. You checked his calendar, Thistle said. You reorganized his entire afternoon for this. I confirmed his availability. Different thing. It is the same thing. Again. Margot nodded once, crisp and professional. This afternoon, then. Bea positioned herself in the corridor outside the infirmary. She brought needlework. She was a queen engaged in a genteel hobby. The fact that the infirmary door was thin enough to hear through was simply an architectural feature she happened to appreciate. For the first 10 minutes, she heard nothing but the quiet sounds of a routine medical examination. Margot's calm, clinical voice giving instructions, the clink of instruments. Then she heard the flinch. The examination table creaked with the sudden movement of a large man trying to occupy less space. A pause followed, so loaded that Bea could feel it through the door. More clinical instructions. More quiet. The stethoscope, presumably, being moved across his chest. She could picture it. Margot's steady hands, Garrett's rigid stillness, two people pretending this was ordinary, while every nerve in both their bodies screamed otherwise. Then she heard the growl. It was low, involuntary, and unmistakable. Not threatening, even through a closed door Bea could read the register. It was possessive, approving. A deep, primal sound that had absolutely no place in a medical examination. It was the sound of a wolf whose human had lost control of his own vocal cords for one devastating second. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Bea had ever heard. After what felt like a century, Margot's voice resumed, slightly tighter, slightly faster, completely professional. The examination continued. 4 minutes later, the infirmary door burst open and Garrett emerged. He was pulling his shirt on with frantic haste. His face was a mask of composure that was fooling absolutely no one. His ears were red. He saw Bea in the corridor with her needlework. He stopped. "Beta," she said pleasantly. "How was your checkup?" "Fine." He said it the way someone says fine when their house is on fire and they'd prefer not to discuss it. "You look well." "I am well. Very well. Completely well. Excuse me." He walked away, quickly. He turned the wrong way at the end of the corridor, realized it, turned back, passed Bea again without making eye contact, and disappeared around the correct corner. Bea set down her needlework and slipped into the infirmary. Margot was standing at the counter with her back to the door, her hands braced on the edge of the basin. She was not moving. The stethoscope was still around her neck. "Margot, dear, everything go all right?" "He's in perfect health." Margot's voice was flat, controlled, the voice of a woman holding herself together through sheer professional will. "Wonderful. You seem a little—" "I'm fine." She turned. Her face was composed. Her eyes were steady. Her hands, Bea noticed, were trembling. "Of course," Bea said gently. She left. Over the next 3 hours, she found excuses to pass by the infirmary 4 times. Through the open door, she watched Margot reorganize her supply closet. First alphabetically, then by medicinal property, then by date of harvest, then alphabetically again. She's losing it, Bea thought with a mix of triumph and genuine concern. She's coping, Thistle corrected, in the only way she knows how, organizing things until the feelings go away. It's not going to work, but it's what she's got. It was the first time Thistle had said something about the situation that wasn't a reprimand, and Bea felt a small, surprised rush of gratitude toward her wolf. "Don't read into that," Thistle added immediately. "I'm observing, not supporting your schemes." That evening, Anya found Bea in the library. The junior healer's eyes were dancing. "My queen, I thought you should know. She's reorganized the supply closet 4 times. She is now sorting dried herbs by the phase of the moon under which they were harvested." "Is that medically relevant?" It is absolutely not medically relevant. It is the behavior of a woman who has been fundamentally destabilized and is pretending she hasn't been. Anya paused. Also, he growled at her. I may have heard something to that effect. She hasn't mentioned it, she won't, but she dropped a jar of comfrey root when I brought it up and said, I don't know what you're talking about, in a voice that could shatter glass. Bee smiled. Anya smiled. Two women, united in their commitment to the romantic welfare of a colleague, who would kill them both if she found out. It took a week, and a bottle of very good wine. Bee had not planned this one, genuinely. The wine was a gift from a trading partner, and she'd invited Margot to share it because the woman looked like she hadn't relaxed since the health check, which she probably hadn't. They sat in Bee's private sitting room, firelight flickering off the stone walls. Margot drank her first glass with the careful precision she brought to everything. She drank her second glass slightly faster. By the third, something in her posture changed. Not a collapse, exactly, but a softening. A slight loosening of the iron framework that held her upright at all times. Can I ask you something? Margot said, staring into her wine. Anything, darling. Your wolf. Does she ever report things to you? About Desmond? Things you didn't ask for and don't need to know? Bee kept her expression soft and curious. Inside, every alarm she had was blaring. Don't you dare, Thistle warned. Thistle has opinions about everything, Bee said carefully. She's like a very judgmental audit committee. Why do you ask? Margot took a long sip. Lyra, my wolf. She has a clinical approach to things. She assesses, evaluates, provides tactical analysis. That sounds useful. It is useful. When she's analyzing a patient or a threat. Margot paused. The firelight caught the slight flush on her cheeks. It is considerably less useful when she decides to apply the same methodology to, she gestured vaguely with her wine glass. People. People, Bee repeated, very carefully not smiling. A person. One specific person. She has developed an extensive file. Margot closed her eyes. She calculates the load-bearing capacity of his forearms as a structural assessment. I don't need to know the load-bearing capacity of anyone's forearms, Bee. I am a healer. I know what forearms do. I do not need a tactical evaluation of their functionality. Bee's hand trembled around her wine glass. She was going to die. She was going to die right here in this chair from the effort of not laughing. And it's not just the forearms, Margot continued, and the wine was doing its work now. It's everything. His jaw tension patterns, his gait efficiency, the acoustic properties of his voice at different registers. She filed a formal internal report on his posture. There was a scoring matrix, Bee, with weighted categories. A small, strangled sound escaped Bee's throat. She disguised it as a cough. And the worst part, Margot said, her voice dropping to a whisper of genuine distress, is that I can't tell anymore which observations are hers and which are mine. I used to know. 2 years ago, I could tell the difference between her analysis and my own thoughts. Now I'll be in the middle of examining a patient, and I'll notice that Garrett's rolled his sleeves up in the corridor, and I'll think, optimal vascular presentation. And I don't know if that's my wolf or if that's ME. And either way, it's completely... She stopped. She looked at Bee. The flush had spread to her neck. I've said too much. You haven't said nearly enough. I should go. Have another glass. Absolutely not. Margot set down her wine with the deliberate care of someone who knew their defenses had been compromised. She stood, smoothed her tunic, reassembled her composure piece by piece, like a soldier putting on armor. I shouldn't have. Thank you for the wine, my queen. Margot, she paused at the door. It's all right to notice things, Bee said, and she meant it, fully and completely, with no scheme behind it. That's all it is, noticing. Margot's hand tightened on the doorframe. For 1 second, her face was unguarded, not distressed, not clinical, just open. Just a woman who had been carrying something alone for too long. Then the composure was back. She nodded once and was gone. Bee sat in the firelight, her wine untouched, and felt the full weight of what she'd just heard. Not the comedy of it, though she would treasure optimal vascular presentation until the day she died, but the loneliness underneath. "She's scared," Thistle said quietly. "I know. They both are." "I know, Thistle. That's why I can't just leave it alone." For once, her wolf didn't argue. The Silver Falls opportunity presented itself beautifully. The pack, 2 days' ride east, had sent word requesting a healer's consultation. Their own healer was struggling with a wave of winter sickness, and they were asking Northern Ridge for help. "Perfect," Bee said to Desmond that evening. He didn't look up from his book. "No, I haven't said anything yet." "You said perfect in that voice. The voice that precedes destruction. Silver Falls needs a healer. Margot is the obvious choice. But we can't send the head healer to another pack's territory without diplomatic escort. That's protocol, not matchmaking." Desmond lowered his book. "And the diplomatic escort would be Garrett, obviously. He handles all interpack relations. And before you suggest Jorik insulted the Silver Falls Beta's mother at last year's Harvest Festival. You told me yourself." Desmond stared at her with the expression of a man watching a perfectly laid trap close. "How long?" 3 days. 1 day's travel each way, 1 for the consultation. This one is actually reasonable, Thistle admitted. Silver Falls genuinely needs help. "Thank you, Thistle. I'm not endorsing the scheme. I'm acknowledging the logistics." They left at dawn the next morning. Bee watched from the upper terrace, 2 figures on horseback, maintaining a precise, agonizing distance of exactly 1 horse width between them, riding out through the compound gates with the posture of 2 people headed to their own executions. She packed 4 changes of clothes for a 3-day trip, Anya reported, appearing at Bee's elbow, and a backup medical kit for her backup medical kit. "He polished his sword twice last night," Desmond offered from behind them. Both women turned. He shrugged. "I'm not participating in this. I'm observing." "He's as bad as you are," Thistle said. "He's my mate. He was always going to come around." They returned 3 days later. Margot was riding slightly ahead, her back very straight. Garrett was riding slightly behind, his face unreadable. They did not appear to have resolved anything. They did, however, appear to have developed an even more excruciating awareness of each other's existence. The distance between them had changed quality. It was less of a professional gap now and more of a force field, electromagnetic and visible to anyone with eyes. "Well?" Bee asked Garrett when he came to deliver his report. Silver Falls' winter sickness was a contaminated water source. Margot identified it within 3 hours. Treatment protocol is in her written report. He paused. "She's very good at her job." "And the trip itself?" "Professional, efficient, uneventful." Bee waited. Garrett's jaw worked. He was looking at a point somewhere over her left shoulder, which was his tell for wanting to say something he hadn't authorized himself to say. "She made a field camp," he said eventually. "On the road. I offered to take first watch, and she said..." He stopped, started again. "She organized the campsite. In about 4 minutes. Fire, bedrolls, supplies, perimeter check. Like a military operation. And then she made tea. On a campfire. In the middle of nowhere. In the dark, she made tea and handed me a cup without asking if I wanted one because she already knew I..." He cut himself off. "The consultation went well. Silver Falls sends their thanks." He left. Bee stared after him. The man was coming apart at the seams over a cup of campfire tea. This was either the most romantic or the most pathetic thing she had ever witnessed, and she was not entirely sure which. But that night, Bee passed through the courtyard where some of the younger wolves were roughhousing in wolf form after dinner, chasing each other, wrestling, being young, and there, at the far edge of the yard, sat a large black wolf. Garrett. in wolf form. At an hour when he was usually buried in paperwork, he was just sitting, watching the night sky, his tail curled around his paws, completely still in the way that only wolves could be still, a mind working through something it couldn't work through with human words. He didn't look peaceful. He looked like a wolf who had spent 3 days in close quarters with someone and was now sitting alone in the dark, trying to remember how to be a person who didn't feel this much. Bee's chest ached. "Leave him," Thistle said, and this time it wasn't a reprimand. It was gentle. "He needs this. The shift is letting him feel it without having to name it." Bee left him. She went to bed and held Desmond a little tighter than usual. Some people made it look easy, the falling, the choosing, the letting someone in. She forgot, sometimes, that for some wolves, it was the hardest thing in the world. The border patrol on 3-day was routine. Garrett had run it 100 times. He took 6 wolves along the eastern ridge, checked the markers, logged the scent lines. Bee was in the Great Hall reviewing correspondence when she heard the howl. Not a communication howl, a distress call. Ragged, urgent, from the east. The hall went silent. Every wolf in the room lifted their head. Bee felt Thistle go rigid, every sense sharpening. "East Ridge," Desmond said, already on his feet. "That's Garrett's patrol." The next 20 minutes were organized panic. Desmond dispatched a response team. Bee paced the courtyard, Thistle's anxiety bleeding into her own. Communication howls relayed back. A rogue wolf, single, large, the patrol had engaged. Someone was hurt. They brought him in on a stretcher. 4 wolves in human form, faces grim, carrying Garrett. He'd shifted back. Someone's cloak was thrown over him, blood soaking through the fabric along his left side. His face was gray. His eyes were closed. Later, Bee would learn the details. A rogue wolf, half-starved and desperate, had been denning in the ridge caves. The patrol had stumbled on it. The rogue had lunged for Finn, 19 years old, his first border rotation. Garrett had stepped between the rogue and the boy, taken the hit. Because that was who Garrett was, and that was what he did, and Bee loved him for it, and also wanted to strangle him. The claws had torn deep through the muscle along his ribs and flank. The rogue had been sick, malnourished, half-feral, and the wound was already showing signs of infection by the time they reached the compound. The rest of the patrol had brought the rogue down after Garrett fell. It was dead, a sad, wasted thing, Jorok told her later. Half-starved, probably hadn't eaten in weeks, just desperate and cornered and lashing out at the first thing that moved. But Bee didn't know any of that yet. All she knew was that her beta was being carried through the courtyard, and Margot was running. Bee had never seen Margot run. In 2 years, she had seen the head healer walk with purpose, stride with urgency, move with efficiency. She had never seen Margot Allister break into a flat sprint. But here she was, bursting from the infirmary into the courtyard, and her face... Bee would never forget it. For 1 second, every wall came down. The composure, the distance, the careful professionalism, all of it evaporated, and what was underneath was raw and terrible and unmistakable. It was the face of a woman looking at the man she loved bleeding on a stretcher. Then it was gone. The mask slammed back, harder than before, and Margot's voice cut through the chaos. "Get him inside. Now. Anya, full trauma kit, silver wash, sutures. Move." Everyone moved. Because when Margot used that voice, you didn't think. You obeyed. Bee stood in the courtyard, her hands pressed to her mouth, and guilt hit her like a wall. She hadn't caused this. A rogue wolf on the border had nothing to do with her. Garrett would have been on that patrol regardless. But the thought came anyway. She'd been playing with their feelings like puzzle pieces, and now he was bleeding, and Margot's face had cracked open, and... "You didn't do this," Thistle said firmly. "The rogue did this. Garrett's protective instincts did this. This is not your scheme gone wrong. This is pack life. It has always been dangerous. Now stop spiraling and be useful." It was the most words Thistle had ever said to her at once, and every one of them landed. Bee wiped her eyes, straightened her spine, and went to bring clean linens. Margot had lurked for 9 hours. Bee stayed out of the way. She sat in the corridor, the same spot where she'd perched with her needlework during the health check, which felt like a different lifetime and incredibly foolish now. And she waited. Anya came out at intervals. The wound is deep but clean, no organ damage. The infection is aggressive. She's fighting it with silver wash and feverfew. Then later, his temperature is climbing. She's worried about it reaching his blood. And later still, quieter. She won't let anyone else touch him. At midnight, Desmond brought Bee a blanket and sat beside her. "Go to bed," he said. "No." "He's strong. Margot is the best healer in 3 territories." "I know. I just need to be here." He put his arm around her. They sat together, listening to the sounds of Margot saving Garrett's life. "She hasn't stopped," Thistle said. 9 hours. Her hands are steady. They will shake later, Bee thought, when he's safe, when she can afford it. By dawn, the fever had stabilized. Margot had cleaned, stitched, and packed the wound. She'd administered 3 different drafts. She had not eaten, slept, or left the room. Bee slipped in with tea and bread. She found Margot in a chair beside Garrett's bed. Not sleeping, her eyes were open, fixed on his face, but running on something deeper than wakefulness. "You should rest," Bee said softly. "His temperature needs monitoring through the night." "Margot, it's morning. It's been morning for 2 hours." Margot blinked, looked at the window, seemed genuinely surprised to find daylight there. "Let Anya take over." "No." Not argumentative, just fact. The sky was blue, water was wet, and she was not leaving. Bee set the tea down and left. She came back 4 more times over the next day. Each time, Margot was in the same chair. She had accepted the tea, but not the food. She had spoken to no one except to give Anya instructions. It was the longest Bee had ever gone without hearing Margot say the word protocol. "She's been in that chair for 31 hours, Thistle observed. "She has not reorganized a single shelf. This is how you know it's serious." It was such a perfectly Thistle thing to say, clinical, dry, and accidentally devastating, that Bee almost laughed. Almost. On the second night, Bee was dozing in the corridor when she heard a voice from inside the infirmary. Not Margot's. Rough, broken, barely there. She was at the door before she knew she'd moved. Through the crack, she could see Garrett, eyes half open, glassy with fever, his hand fumbling at the blanket. Margot was on her feet, easing him back. "Don't move. You're safe. You're in the infirmary." "Margot." His voice was a wreck. "I'm here. Lie still." "He's quiet." Garrett's eyes were unfocused, drifting. He was talking to her, but he wasn't entirely there. Fen went quiet when the fever got bad. The pain or the infection, I don't know, he just stopped. Like the connection went dark, and I was alone in my own head, and I couldn't. His hand found her wrist. Not a decision, just gravity. "He came back," Garrett said, and his voice cracked. "When I could smell you. The lavender. He came back." Margot was very still. Her other hand came up and covered his. His first thought, was about your hands. His eyes were closing. The fever was pulling him under again. He said, "Your hands could build a house in a hurricane." That's his way of... Garrett. I was going to be professional. He was almost gone, the words blurring. "Because it's the right thing. Because you deserve better than a man who's just machinery, who only knows how to work." But he went quiet, and I thought I was going to die, and all I could think was that I never said it. I never said any of it. And what kind of coward? His eyes closed. His grip on her wrist went slack. He was under again. Margot sat with his hand in both of hers, pressed to her chest, and she was shaking. Not her hands, all of her. Fine tremors running through her whole body like a wire pulled too tight. Bea eased the door shut. Her own hands were shaking. Her eyes burned. "That wasn't meant for you," Thistle said. "I know." She walked to her quarters, climbed into bed next to Desmond, who woke enough to pull her close. She pressed her face into his shoulder and cried, quietly, so as not to wake him fully, though he probably heard because wolves always heard. She cried because Garrett had spent 2 years being the perfect beta, the immovable pillar, and it had taken a fever and a rogue's claws for him to say what she'd seen written across his face every time he thought no one was watching. And she cried because she couldn't fix this part. The schemes and the proximity, those she could engineer. But the fear underneath, the belief that loving someone made you weak, that your own heart was a liability, that wasn't something you could organize out of people. They had to walk through it themselves. "They will," Thistle said, and it was the gentlest she had ever been. "You've done enough. The rest is theirs." He woke properly on the 3rd day. Bea wasn't there. She was handling the work that had piled up while her beta was unconscious. But Anya found her within 10 minutes. "He's awake, lucid. She's with him." "How is he?" Asking about patrol reports, so normal. "And Margot?" Anya considered. She smiled when he opened his eyes. It lasted about half a second, and then she started checking his wound and telling him off for moving. But it was there. "Give them space." "My queen, I have been giving them space for 2 years. I have given so much space I could rent it out." "A little more, Anya." The next few days were different. Bea watched because that was what she did, and what she saw was the architecture of 2 years' careful avoidance starting to buckle. Garrett was confined to the infirmary for a week, Margot's orders non-negotiable. He was a terrible patient. Restless, frustrated, trying to review reports from bed. Margot confiscated his work ledger on the 2nd day. "You are healing," she told him. "Your body does not care about the grain inventory. The grain inventory doesn't catalog itself. It will survive without your personal attention." On the surface, this was professional, healer managing patient. What was different, what Bea noticed every time she visited, was the looking. Before the injury, they had perfected the art of not looking. 2 years of carefully averted gazes, of attention always directed somewhere else. Now they kept forgetting. Margot's eyes would rest on his face a beat too long while checking his temperature. Garrett's gaze would follow her across the room when she went for supplies, and he wouldn't look away when she turned back. Neither of them mentioned the fever confession, but Bea could see it between them. The knowledge of what had been said, sitting in the room like a third person, impossible to ignore, and too frightening to address. The conversation happened on the 5th evening. Bea was bringing dinner to the infirmary. She was 10 steps from the door when she heard their voices. Low, careful, nothing like professional. She stopped. "You remember what you said, Margot." A pause. "I remember enough, Garrett." "Do you want to take it back?" A longer pause. Bea pressed herself to the wall and held her breath. "No." His voice was rough. "I should want to. It complicates things. It's unprofessional. You're the head healer and I'm the beta and... Don't tell me what it is. I know what it is. I've known for 2 years." Silence. "Fen has been writing elegies about your absence when you leave the room," Garrett said. "Full elegies, with rhyme schemes. I've tried to make him stop. I can't. Lyra filed a tactical assessment of your jawline last week." Margot's voice was shaking. "She rated it a threat to operational focus. She recommended I request a transfer to another pack." "Did you consider it?" "I told her the recommendation was denied due to insufficient alternative postings." A pause. "And because leaving would have been worse." There was movement. Someone standing up. "Margot." His voice had changed, not the beta, just a man. "I spent 3 days unconscious, and the thing that brought me back was the smell of your hands. That's not professional. And it's the truest thing I've ever said." "You said it while delirious." I'm saying it again now. More silence. Then Margot's voice, barely above a whisper. I'm not good at this. I only know how to be the healer. And I only know how to be the beta. So what do we do? I don't know, but I'd rather figure it out with you than keep being alone in the same room. The quiet that followed was different from every silence Bee had ever heard between them. It wasn't empty. It wasn't tense. It wasn't full of things unsaid. It was just peace. Bee set the dinner tray on the floor outside the door, turned, and walked away. She didn't need to see. She didn't need to scheme. They'd found it themselves, the way Thistle had said they would. Told you, her wolf said. Oh, shut up, Bee thought, smiling so hard her face ached. The mating ceremony happened 3 weeks later, under a full moon, because some traditions existed for a reason. Bee had offered to plan something elaborate: flowers, music, a cake the size of a small cart. Garrett and Margot had declined, with the unified front of two people who were already operating as a single unit. Something simple, Margot said. Something quiet, Garrett added. The way he said it, standing beside her, his hand resting at the small of her back like it had always belonged there, told Bee more than any ceremony ever could. So it was simple. The clearing behind the compound where the pack runs started. The full moon overhead, silver and heavy. The pack gathered in a loose circle, some in human form, some shifted, because that was how they were. Both things. Always. Desmond officiated, because the Alpha's word made it formal. But the words were brief. This isn't fate, Desmond said, and his voice carried across the clearing. We don't do fate here. This is two wolves who saw each other clearly and chose to stay. Who could have walked away at any point, and are standing here because they decided, not because the moon told them to, not because their wolves demanded it, but because they want this. Each other. The whole complicated, terrifying, beautiful mess of it. Garrett's hand found Margot's. She laced her fingers through his. Do you choose this? Yes, Garrett said. No hesitation. Yes, Margot said. And she smiled, a real, full, unguarded smile. The kind Bee had only seen in fragments over 2 years. The kind that transformed her entire face. The marking was theirs. Garrett tilted his head, baring his neck, and Margot leaned in. Her teeth found the place where his neck met his shoulder, and she bit. He made a sound, quiet, rough, somewhere between pain and relief, and pulled her closer. Then he marked her. Same place. She didn't flinch. She pressed into it, her hands fisting in the back of his shirt. The pack howled, not rehearsed, spontaneous, full-throated, a sound of recognition and joy that started with the wolves in shifted form and spread to the humans who tipped their faces to the moon and let their voices go rough and wild. It was the most beautiful thing Bee had ever heard, and she was crying before the last note faded. Oh, Thistle began. Let me have this, Bee thought fiercely, tears streaming down her face. I earned these tears. You are a sentimental disaster. I am a sentimental genius. Thistle said nothing, which was as close to agreement as Bee would ever get. After third, as the pack celebrated, food and firelight and laughter, wolves shifting in and out of form with easy joy, Bee found the couple. Well, she said, dabbing her eyes with the handkerchief she'd had the foresight to bring. You're welcome. Garrett had his arm around Margot's waist, a position that looked like it had been custom built for him. We would have figured it out. In another 2 years, maybe, Margot said, leaning into his shoulder. See? Bee beamed. I saved you. You should be thanking me. I saved you 2 entire years of organizing supply closets and writing elegies. You locked us in an archive room, Garrett said. For the good of the pack's filing system. You made me give him a physical, Margot said. His health is important. You sent us on a 3-day trip together. Silver Falls needed a healer. That was legitimate. They looked at her, 2 pairs of eyes, one amber, one dark, united in fond, exasperated, and entirely transparent affection. Thank you, Bee, Margot said softly. Bee burst into a fresh round of tears. When she'd recovered mostly, she let her gaze drift across the clearing, past the bonfire and the dancing, and it landed on two figures near the forge. Torvin, the pack's enormous, silent weapons master, was attempting to explain the metallurgy of a new blade to Elsbeth, the librarian. He was using hand gestures more enthusiastic than anything Bee had ever seen from him. Elsbeth was clutching a book to her chest and nodding rapidly, her cheeks pink. Something warm and dangerous kindled in Bee's chest. "No," Thistle said. "I haven't said anything." "You don't have to. I can feel it." "The answer is no. Absolutely not. You are not doing this again." Desmond appeared at her side. He followed her gaze. He let out a groan that came from the very depths of his soul. "Oh no." "What?" Bee said, the picture of innocence. "They're just talking." "I know that look, Bee. I have been on the receiving end of that look. Please." His voice was laced with real desperation. "Please stop matchmaking my pack." Bee slipped her arm through his and smiled her most dangerous smile. "I'm not matchmaking, darling. I'm just facilitating pack cohesion." "You're incorrigible," Thistle said. "You love it," Bee thought. "I absolutely do not." But even Thistle, deep in the back of Bee's mind, was watching the weapons master gesture wildly about carbon steel while the librarian clutched her book and blushed. And even Thistle, who disapproved of everything, didn't quite manage to look away. Desmond closed his eyes and prayed for strength. He was married to a hurricane. He had a feeling the weather wasn't changing anytime soon.